Hello, good day to all. My name is Yusri Abdul Halim and I am the director of Vikingdom. The reason why I'm doing this video press release today is to clarify matters regarding the confusion of the Vikingdom synopsis. I have to emphasize, this whole fiasco is really much about the Vikingdom synopsis and not about the movie Vikingdom itself. And this is very much a case of judging a book by its cover, as this was raised solely on the plot synopsis on IMDb. The main complainant, who is Dr. Carl E.H. Siegfried, who comes from the US, made this complaint, and the movie has not yet been shown in the US. So it's very unlikely that he has seen this movie. But all due respect, I have never received any letter or email from Dr. Carl Siegfried, as I don't frequent the Facebook pages of Vikingdom, nor do I go to the Kiari Studios Facebook, and quite honestly, I don't even check my own Facebook. I'm not that kind of person. Quite honestly, I think a lot of you out there can relate to this, and I don't think it is a crime for not being inactive, or for being inactive on Facebook. But because of this, I missed this open letter completely. However, I've recently been forwarded a copy of this email from Dr. Siegfried, sent on the 17th of September 2013 to Dr. Shireen. I have read it, and may I say that I appreciate this letter now that I have read it. It was written very respectfully and politely asked for an explanation of this movie and the synopsis, and how I wish this letter got to me before all this went out of hand. Unfortunately, the interviews that Dr. Siegfried has been responding to ever since were misquotes, or maybe some lost in translation. One bad case of amateurish journalism is by Free Malaysia Today, or FMT News, where the journalist picked up a misquoted interview in Malay, in the Malay language, translated it for Dr. Siegfried to respond to. Now, I was not even interviewed by this person named Lisa J. Arifin. This is journalism at its worst. Hence this video interview. Now, you have to understand that Norse mythology and Vikings as a whole is not a topic that Malaysian press are awfully familiar with. You may ask, why were these inaccuracies in Malaysian media not corrected? Now, I have raised complaints, albeit very privately, with the local media for the reason not to offend them. However, there is one particular complaint that is on record. On the 28th of August this year, I tweeted, quote, "Banyak fakta salah pasal Vikingdom on M-Star Online. Harap dapat diperbetulkan," unquote. Directly translated word for word, quote, "Many wrong facts about Vikingdom on M-Star Online. Hope this can be rectified," unquote. I've also been quoted as saying that Thor is based on the Marvel comic, which makes me sound like a complete idiot. And also, this quote that I allegedly made, the more controversial quote that I said, Westerners can't even really prove the existence of Vikings. This to me is ludicrous. I know more than this, but I will explain this in greater depth a bit later. In a recent interview, I was also asked on whether I knew who Dr. Siegfried was and whether he was a real person. My answer to that was an honest no. I do not know this person. On whether he was real, I admit my answer then was, I can't tell you who's real and who's not on social media. Maybe you, the journalist, should find out. And in no way was this a personal attack or to discredit anyone, but merely stating an obvious fact. You don't know whether keyboard warriors or a person behind the screen of a computer is real, and this was just a fact. Before I go into greater detail, I would like to highlight a point maybe that some of you don't know or needs highlighting, or some of you do know but probably needs reminding. But first of all, this script and story was not written by myself. Instead, the script and original story was written by Mr. James Coyne, an American living in the US. And this is in no way trying to dodge responsibility. I will answer all the misunderstandings that have been raised so far, but maybe Mr. Coyne should also be given a chance to give a word or two on the script and the story itself. The first issue that was brought up by Dr. Siegfried was the use of this term, the clash of myth and history, which he wasn't happy with. Now, this is a plot description on IMDb where it says this movie is a clash of myth and history, and our Facebook page it says clash of myth, history and fiction. Now, we have been accused by Dr. Siegfried, who was unfortunately misinformed by Malaysian media, of changing our statement of this being a movie on myth and history to it being pure fiction. We are accused of selling out our own movie or backpedaling on our statement. On the contrary, I have always stated this is a work of fiction. A lot of interviews have been done even before Mr. Siegfried raised his concerns, but most Malaysian interviews are verbal between me and the reporter. I give out points, they take down the points, and they go back to the offices and draft articles. So there's no proof. Fortunately for me, I have answered a couple of interviews in the form of email to US-based publications. One of the interviews was done on the 4th of September. Now bear in mind, the first letter that Dr. Carl sent to us was on the 17th of September. This interview was done with a certain Miss Rosie Fletcher from Total Film magazine on the 4th of September. She asked me this question, quote, how much of the story is based on real historical figures, how much is from mythology, and how much is completely from James Coyne's imagination, unquote. My answer, in no way that this is edited, you can check with Ms. Fletcher as well. The answer was, quote, the only historical event in the movie is the Lindisfarne attack by the Vikings in 793, but even that is given a fictional twist. Our version has Thor leading the Vikings to attack the monastery in revenge for abandoning the old gods and converting to Christianity. Apart from Thor, Freya, from Norse mythology, not much else is based on that, unquote. Now this somewhat explains the plot synopsis that's on IMDb, the term a collision of history and myth. History, being the first ever recorded Viking raid in January 6, 793 in Lindisfarne, and myth, the use of names or characters from Norse mythology. However, in the IMDb summary, it also clearly spells out that this is a fantasy. Probably this was missed out by Dr. Siegfried, or even not highlighted. But if Dr. Siegfried had actually watched the movie, which I doubt that he'll do now, he would immediately know that this is clearly a work of fiction, as it has zombies and monsters in hell. Also, the blood eclipse, which is something made up. It is obviously something that's never happened before in our history, where the sun burns red as the moon crosses its path. And I'm not foolish enough to claim that the blood eclipse or hell, monsters or zombies were part of history. There was another interview that I did on the 5th of September with Mr. Jeff Berkowitz from Sci-Fi magazine. He asked me this question. Question, quote, for sci-fi readers who may not yet have heard of Vikingdom, how would you describe this picture? Unquote. My answer was, quote, it is a fantasy film loosely based on Viking sagas and Norse mythology. A few characters and names are taken from there, but that is where it ends, unquote. He also asked me this question, quote, question, the god Thor plays a key role in the film, yet most people know him only through the comic book. Other than the fact that your story takes place in a proper historical context, how does your vision of Thor differ from that of the comic book? Unquote. My answer was, quote, I wouldn't say our story is historically correct either. However, from our research, we found out Thor is mostly described to have had red hair and red beard, not at all Marvel's blonde depiction. Unquote. So clearly, we have always stated that this film is a work of fiction. The other issue that was brought up by Mr. Siegfried was the issue of changing the Norse mythology. He said that we actually turned it upside down and changed quite a bit of it. Let me stress that this is not really a new concept, where mythology is changed in modern day entertainment. For example, Greek mythology has been exploited before in movies and other forms of entertainment, like in the movie Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. Zeus, who is the equivalent of Thor, I believe, because Zeus is the god of sky and thunder in Greek mythology, is the main antagonist. He declares war unless his master bolt is returned to Mount Olympus before the next summer solstice. And in the video games, there's a video game named the God of War, and I believe there's also God of War 2 and 3. I'm not a gamer myself, but I've been told this by a good friend. God of War is an award-winning and critically acclaimed video game. Poseidon Aphrodite, Zeus, Artemis, Hades are all listed as antagonists. Now bear in mind, these are names of Greek gods from Greek mythology. Clearly, this is the equivalent of the role reversal of Thor in Vikingdom. Creative license was applied to the titles I mentioned before, and even to Thor himself in Marvel's version in the movie Thor and Avengers. My question is, isn't creative license permitted to tackle a, quote, fantasy movie loosely based on mythology? I wouldn't think so. Now we come to this issue of religion. This is something really sensitive, a matter where I wouldn't really want to explain, but since this has been brought up, I guess I would have to explain anyways. Now, why were all the titles I mentioned before this, which was Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, God of Thunder, and even Clash of the Titans, to name a few, never an issue? In case people out there don't know, Hellenismos is a religion that still worships the Greek gods up to this very day. Weren't these people offended by Percy Jackson, or the God of War, or even Clash of the Titans? I'm sure there's more, but just to name a few. Maybe not, because these titles are seen as works of fiction. Now, apart from Hellenismos, there is the religion of Raelians, the worship of aliens. Now, I can't tell you the number of movies that I've seen before where aliens come from distant planets to this Earth, to destroy Earth and destroy mankind. Wonder how Raelians would think about those kind of movies. There's also the worship of Satan, but let's not go there for today. My point is that there are so many religions in this world, and quite honestly, we were not aware of the Asatru religion, and neither was James, I believe, the scriptwriter. We have to emphasize our script was written based from characters from Norse mythology books and sources only, and never once did we cross into the holy books of Asatru, nor any other religious books from any other religion. To the believers of the heathen faith and to the Asatru religion, we stress that we are not referring to the gods of your religion. Some may argue that they are one and the same, but our fictional story was based on Norse mythology and not the Asatru religion. I'd like to elaborate further because you might say that I'm going round and round in circles without giving you actual point, but I think I have to elaborate further on this because I do think I owe an explanation to the believers of Asatru religion more than to anyone else. Now, allow me to use an analogy for me to put my point across. Say, if I wanted to learn how to make an apple pie, one of the ways would be for me to actually walk into a bookstore, go to the food section, find a cookbook, and get the recipe for a good old apple pie. Now, while I'm there, I might find other ways on how to make good apple pie by other chefs. Now, I will also stumble on a lot of other recipes from different books, from other chefs, on the different types of meals and dishes that can be made from apples. But more likely than not, what I won't find is a book on how to grow an apple tree. Now, these two, although seem closely related, but they are the interest of two different groups of people altogether. I will have to cross over to the other side of the bookstore, to the botanical department perhaps, I presume, to know how to grow apple trees. And while I'm there will be other books on how to grow other plants as well. Not to take this literally, because as I mentioned before this in a previous interview, don't take this literally because the last thing that I want is for me to wake up the next morning, tomorrow morning, and to find a headline that says, director makes comparisons between religions and apples. But as a concept, take this as a concept to show that this was an honest oversight. This was the case with Vikingdom. We went to the mythology section and Viking history section because that was our interest at that point in time. Not once did the word Asatru pop up. Obviously, if we wanted to know about Asatru, we would have to go over to the other side of the bookstore to the religion section. Now, if there are any similarities between the two, we deeply apologize. We respect your religion as much as we'd like you to respect ours. Now, there's also other misunderstandings that I said I was going to explain. Some of the quotes that were supposed to have been made by me, these were misquotes or quotes that were badly understood or badly interpreted by the local media. One of these quotes, the controversial quote, the claim that I supposedly made about how the Westerners can't even prove that the Vikings really existed. Now, I might live in this small part of the world, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, but over here, we too do have the History Channel. We have the Discovery Channel here too. I know quite a bit of European, Scandinavian history, culture. I know quite a bit of Norse and Greek mythology. I also know about the Romans. I also know about the aliens. Basically, what you guys see over there on your History Channel, we see over here in our History Channel. Because History Channel over here is a syndicated channel. Not only that, I also consider myself to be a world traveler. I have been to many countries before, and I like to soak up on local culture while I'm there. I have also been to Sweden, a number of times, or maybe 2 or 3 times, I can't remember, but I can check. If need be, needs further proof, I can provide you with my passports. And I also quite like to read. Admittedly, I don't know as much about Vikings as Dr. Siegfried does, I'm sure, because Dr. Siegfried is, after all, a Viking expert, and I've never claimed to be a Viking expert. This is the same as how Mr. Steven Spielberg can't claim himself to be a paleontologist or dinosaur expert just because he directed Jurassic Park. Now let's just say I'm lying. Let's just say, just for the sake of argument, I'm lying. I've never been abroad. I don't read books. I don't watch the History Channel. Let's go on the grounds of common sense and logic. Now, how can someone working on this film for a period of 2 years, who went through a lot of reference material, be it pictorial, images, text from books and from the net, could have said this? I am not only the director of Vikingdom, I'm also the visual effects director of Vikingdom and also co-production designer of Vikingdom. I obviously designed a lot of elements based on real archaeological findings, historical sites and the likes. There were a lot of references that I took from the net and from books. Now this is obviously a misquote because I would know, working on this for 2 years, I know that the Vikings did really exist. It was just a mistake done by a local press who are not familiar with Viking history. Now, Mr. Siegfried also accused me of being disrespectful towards heathens and the Asatru by claiming that the Asatru god cannot be proven real. He also asks whether we can prove the existence of Allah. Now my take on this is very clear and simple. All gods from all religions are real to all their respective worshippers. Who in their right frame of mind would commit, pray and worship to someone or something that's not real in their hearts, in their minds, in their souls? So my answer is that Asatru gods are as real to its believers as Allah is to Muslims. What I really said was that Norse mythology itself was the one that cannot be proven real. And I mean that with utmost respect to the people who are specialists in this field. After all, there is a reason why it's called mythology and not history. If it can be proven as history, I will gladly retract that statement and make a full public apology. Over here in Malaysia too, we have our own culture, we have our own myths, and never once myths are being taught in schools to our kids in history classes because of the lack of evidence. Now we come up to the issue of the film entitled Innocence of Muslims. Mr. Siegfried actually likened the film Innocence of Muslims to my film, Vikingdom. Now let me stress that I personally feel there's a big difference. Why I say this is because Innocence of Muslims was done with the intent to insult Islam and its believers on the basis of hatred towards this religion by the makers of this film. I, on the other hand, do not hate the Asatru religion, and I do not condone the concept of hating another person's belief or religion. Furthermore, I find that the Norse mythology is very fascinating. Even before I embarked on this project, I had already known and heard of this fantastic and intriguing culture. But the more I got into it, the more I knew it was much too much for me to comprehend, or even the general audience to comprehend, within a movie that is less than 2 hours long. Thus, that is why we went on the fictional approach. And while we're on the topic of innocence of Muslims, I might add another thing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the movie Innocence of Muslims was never banned in any Western country in the name of freedom of speech and also freedom of expression. And I don't mean this to challenge anyone. I'm not going on the offense, I'm merely on the defense. My sincere question is, doesn't this movie of mine, which is after all a work of fiction, fall under freedom of speech and freedom of expression too? Now, before I end the session, let me make it clear to you today that I am not defending Vikingdom, as I feel this film does not need defending, it being a work of fiction. Today, I'm defending myself, as I have been badly misquoted, poorly mistranslated, and greatly misunderstood. I do not wish to lengthen this issue, and I hope my explanation today is satisfactory to all. Now, before I finish, I think it is appropriate to end it with a line uttered by our hero, Eirik, played by Dominic Purcell, at the end of this movie. He says, quote, "Men are now free to choose their own gods, their friends and their enemies," unquote. I, for one, prefer to have more friends than enemies. Thank you for watching. God bless us all.